All right, well, thank you very much for gathering at the end of this, almost the end of this long day. We're at the middle. And welcome to this discussion about, great title, Transatlantic Relations at a Time of Growing Isolationism. It's a very timely discussion, of course, and I would even start by stressing that perhaps it's not just because of the possibility of a second Trump administration, something we'll discuss with our wonderful panelists, but beyond Trump, there are obviously major issues allies need to figure out amongst themselves to keep their relations vibrant and productive and to move it forward beyond the 75 years that have already passed on defense, on industrial and economic issues. And these are some of the themes that we will be discussing today with our great panel. To my left, Margus Tsahkna, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Estonia. Next to him, Anna Isabel Xavier, Secretary of State at the Ministry of National Defense of Portugal. Next to her, Benjamin Haddad, an MP in France, but of course also formerly at the Atlantic Council in Washington, D.C., and Andrea Kendall-Taylor, Senior Fellow and Director at the Transatlantic Security Program at CNAS in D.C. I'm going to jump right into it and ask our panelists, how do they assess the state of transatlantic relations today, and can we talk about one transatlantic relationship? Yes, go ahead.
Hello, it's really great, ready to be here, and I'm losing my microphone. So, but of course, it's the right time to talk about the transatlantic relations, and I'm not even talking much more about like Estonian foreign minister, but as a person who's living in Estonia and at the border of Russia. There are like 3 points I want to make for the beginning. And first, of course, this transatlantic bond is stronger and practical than ever before. And I'm not talking about the political cooperation even. I'm talking about the real bond, the real relations on economical level. Our economies are more dependent to each other than actually we are thinking, and maybe people in US thinking. And as well, the security situation in Europe is deeply connected to the security of US as well. So this bond is clear for everybody, and it means that both of us we need to work with that, and we need to understand as well that it's not easy to cut it. It is impossible actually. The second point is of course the European part. We put in 3.2% of GDP. Poland is putting 4%, and so on. But it is obvious that Europe must do more. And we are all very nervous that if Trump is saying something about that, you must pay more. And he's using very brutal vocabulary, and maybe it's not good vocabulary right now when we have a Russian aggression against Ukraine. But be honest, he's right. And many other presidents before, and also President Biden, has announced that Europe must do more, and we must. We must invest to our defense. We must invest to that actually we are able to be independent more than actually we are on defense level, but also in a political means. So Europe can do more, and we need to do more, because this is existential question for us, but also, quoting my first point, to US as well. So, and whatever we call it like independent and whatever. In Europe, this is obvious that we do more, and actually we do. And the best advocate for that as well is Putin with his aggression towards Ukraine, because I think this mindset has changed, that the threat from Russia to Europe is real. And as an example for that, for me, was that the Swedish people decided to join NATO after more than 200 years of neutrality. Nobody forced them. And this is like the clear evidence that the knowledge is there. But the third point is actually a bit like the other way around, that like Europe must convince US that we are doing more, but actually the US must do the same with Europeans. And be honest, Europe is not granted. And I'm expressing my personal view that during the last half a year, when the process of 61 billion of funds to Ukraine took so long. So I'm not talking about the European Union, but I'm talking about Europeans as voters. So it needs to convince each other that we can do better. And this is the interest of both of us. So maybe it's surprising for you as well, but I think that US must convince Europeans as well. So then the European...
The US must convince Europeans of what?
Of what, that the leadership is there and cooperation is there and this bond is strong and this is practical. And they need it as well as Europeans need it. Because we have elections all over Europe as well this year. And many people are asking the same questions. So we have to be honest. It needs two to tango in the meaning. And we both need each other. This is existential for us both.
So you think the transatlantic relationship is on the ballot this year in Europe as well? That European voters are also thinking about the relationship with the US?
I think that European voters are thinking more than ever before, how can we deal with any kind of conflicts, any kind of security situation? Because the Russian aggression to Europe, to Ukraine, is very close to our borders. And this feeling is there. As I said as well, that the example was the Swedish people decision. I really like it personally, and the Estonians are great about that, and Finland as well. But we are asking now the practical questions. What can we do more, and we do more as Europeans, but also how does this bond working and how strong it is? And also it needs US to convince our voters that they are here. They're working with that, and whoever will be in office after the next elections, this is existential for both sides. Actually, I'm not calling them sides. They are all together. So that's the place.
Thank you. Anna Isabel Xavier, do you share this opinion that the US also needs to convince Europeans that it is still basically committed and reliable?
Well, thank you so much for having me here again for the third time. It's always a pleasure to come to Tallinn and to Lennart Meri's conference. And thank you so much for this starting question. Well, Portugal is a founding member of NATO. So for us, of course, the transatlantic relation is crucial. And we also believe on the importance of leadership, something that Margus stated so much. And in 2 or 3 minutes, very briefly, I would like to raise 3 main concerns. The first one is that Portugal's geostrategic positioning makes it a valuable asset for NATO for the transatlantic relation. Portugal is a bridge between Europe, Africa and America. So this is very important for us, and also in order to anticipate a little bit the question of the elections in the US, for us it's very important that the bilateral relation between Portugal and the United States, but also the transatlantic relation per se, is solid. And we must value that relation, and we must work together for better relation among the two sides of the Atlantic, regardless who the president is and who the next president will be. Of course, that we must be aware of the implications of a change in the White House, but we truly believe that it's important to foster the links between Europe and the United States, and for good and for worse, Ukraine and now even Middle East has helped a lot to build that relation. The second point that I would like to raise is that the threats to our values and principles are not limited to the Euro-Atlantic space. When you raise the question to Margus, what are the current threats? Lisbon is 4,000 kilometers away from Tallinn, but still we share the same threats, the same concerns. And Portugal is very concerned about Africa, as I told before, and Russia is also destabilizing Africa. So similarly to NATO, Portugal follows a 360 degree approach to security, and we are also concerned about the situation in the south, and the fact that NATO is aiming to adopt for the first time at the Washington summit a strategy for the southern flank is obviously a commitment to the importance of this region for our collective security, and of course also acknowledging the importance of the Portuguese contribution. The third and the last point that I would like to raise for now is that, of course, Portugal's privileged position make us not only able to speak to the South, but most importantly to listen to the South. And that's why the southern flank is also so important to balance in any discussion regarding the transatlantic relation. Again, Portugal is a founding member of NATO, and that's why we also believe that the threats that come from the East are very, very important, and they are shared also by us. But it's important also to acknowledge how the threats coming from the South are also have an impact everywhere and in our transatlantic relations as well.
And so do you feel that the US is listening to these concerns that you have about the South, or is that something that needs to be even more addressed?
Of course that we need to keep the effort. We know that since the 24th February 2022, a shift was made to the East, and we also commit with that shift, and we fully commit with the contribution to Ukraine's effort in prevailing as a nation. But we know that our American ally is aware of the stability, of the importance of the stability of the South for the stability of the whole transatlantic region. And that's why at Washington Summit we welcome with enthusiasm the fact that the Southern commitment will be fostered.
Thank you. Benjamin Haddad, how do you assess the current state of the relations, I guess, with an S, between the two continents? And can we talk about one transatlantic relationship?
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me. It's great to be there and see many friends here. The last time I was in Washington, D.C. was in January with my friend Ziggy Pavionis, who's the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee of Lithuania, and a delegation of parliamentarians from Europe to make the case for unblocking the aid to Ukraine to the US Congress. And so we met with representatives, Republicans and Democrats. One piece of advice we got, and that's something we certainly got from the conversations, is if you want to make the case for helping Ukraine to American politicians, Republicans or Democrats, number one, you have to say it sends a message to China and it deters China in the Strait of Taiwan. Number two, it sends a message to Iran with what it's doing in the Red Sea, and because Iran is providing drones to Russia and its aggression against Ukraine. And then it will deter Russia. And of course, if you ask Europeans, it's completely the other way around. And we all see Russia as the preeminent strategic threat to the European continent, not only because of its aggression on Ukraine, but I speak as a French citizen, because Russia is directly targeting us with cyber attacks against our infrastructure, disinformation, interference in our democracy, going after our interests in Africa and elsewhere. Now, I'm not saying this to, be overtly pessimistic about the transatlantic relationship. I think it's key to our security and to the security of Europe. But it's also obvious that we can't just not only flip a coin every 4 years and hope that voters in Michigan and Wisconsin will make the right decision, but even beyond this, it goes, as you mentioned in your introduction, it goes, of course, beyond just President Trump. In 2016, I was in the United States at the time, and I saw many people, both in the US and in Europe, convince themselves that this was an accident in history, it would be a short break, we'd go back to normalcy in 4 years, and so protectionism, nativism, unilateralism. I don't think isolationism, by the way, I don't like that term. The US under Trump had a foreign policy. It was very active in the Middle East and Asia and elsewhere. But Europe was clearly not as central to the US worldview as it used to be, and it was much more unilateral and nationalistic. But the truth is, it's President Obama who decided not to act upon the red line with the direct security consequences that it had
in 2013 in Syria.
Of course, with not only the security consequences it had for Europeans, much more than for the United States, but also the message that it sent to Russia in Crimea in 2014. And so, I think we have to read the writing on the wall, listen to what American leaders are telling us. For years, we've had Democrats and Republicans ask Europeans to take more ownership of their own security, to spend more on defense. And I think that's a very legitimate request of them. When you hear even President Trump saying, well, they're rich countries, why don't they spend more and do it themselves? I don't like the way he's saying it. I don't like the conclusions that he's drawing from it and what it means for NATO and US security guarantees to Europe. But of course, I think it's a legitimate starting point. The good news, though, on this is because the conclusion I draw, and I think a lot of French draw from this, is to say we need to invest more as Europeans and take more ownership of our defense to be able to help Ukraine. That's the first priority, defend itself and win the war against Russia. And of course, to be able to provide for other security concerns. And here I completely share what you said about the South when it comes to security, migration, and elsewhere. But in a way, the only way to salvage and reinvent the transatlantic relationship is precisely also to do this, is to show that European allies have value added, that they have clout, that they're bringing something to the table, that as the US is maybe pivoting to Asia, we can also secure our own neighborhood. And the best way to anchor the US to Europe is precisely to be able to send that message rather than showcasing helplessness and weakness.
So on that point, it's important that Europeans show value added. Do you think that the fact that it was the US that needed to lead the response militarily to the invasion of Ukraine in 2022 stays in the mind of Americans as Europeans not adding value in their own security environment? Obviously, since then, Europe's and Europeans have done way more than anyone expected. But I'm just talking about that moment where leaders of big countries in Europe clearly weren't ready to take that leadership. Was that a moment that we're still paying the price for right now?
Well, we pay decades of defense budget cuts. We also pay, I don't know how I would say this, a form of depoliticization of the European mind, because I was really struck that you have a country, Russia, that's basically amassing troops on the borders, and where Russian leaders, Putin and Medvedev, write papers a few months before that basically saying Ukraine doesn't exist, it's ours. Yeah. And then I remember a lot of the media and expert commentary in France saying, no, but it's not in his interest to do so. He's playing three-dimensional chess and he's trying to obtain something else. No, because we've stopped thinking in terms of hard power, in terms of violence, in terms of conflictual relations. And so it's a slow awakening. Now, to be fair, I mean, if you do look at the accumulated military aid, and not even counting economic, humanitarian aid of Europeans, it's on par, if not above, the one of the United States. I don't think it's a competition, by the way. I don't like these ranking narratives because the US has had a tremendous impact on supporting Ukraine, and we should be extraordinarily grateful and thankful for this because Ukrainians are dying for our own security and the security of Europeans. But Europeans are pulling their weight, and I think the real question now, the real test when we talk about our own security and European sovereignty is how do we manage to do this in the long run? How do we put the resources? How do we have a European defense industry interoperable with the United States, but a European defense industry that rises to the event and manages to not only defend ourselves, but help Ukrainians defend us in the long run?
Thanks. Andrea, Kendall-Taylor, I would like for you to respond or to react to something that Benjamin started by saying, which is that the way he needed and others in the European delegation needed to frame the importance of the supplemental to Ukraine. Does it mean that in the US, Russia isn't seen as an important threat in the way it should be seen or in the way that the Europeans are seeing it? And is that a real problem for the transatlantic relationship?
I think there's a debate in the United States about how to rank and prioritize risks. I think the general consensus is that China is the long-term threat, the most comprehensive threat that the United States has faced, but there is a large contingency in our national security community that recognizes the immediacy and the urgency of addressing the Russia challenge. And so even though you hear a lot about the United States wanting to prioritize China, there are also plenty of people who understand the interlinkages between the conflict in Ukraine and what's happening in the Indo-Pacific. So I think it's an ongoing debate, and I think people take the Russia threat seriously. I think the one thing that I might react to that I've heard also is there's a lot of talk about how Europe needs to demonstrate its value add to the United States. That the best way to solidify the transatlantic relationship is by demonstrating that you need to pull your weight. That's true, But I think it misses the mark a little bit because it's not just about how the US sees Europe. Europe should strengthen and do more for its own defense because the world is fundamentally changing.
Yeah.
It's not just because you need to please the United States and keep them in, but if we're going to address the changing geopolitics, then Europe needs to be a much stronger and capable actor in its own right. There's no way the United States can address the threats today of a rising China, a very revisionist and assertive and aggressive Russia, and also what's happening in the Middle East. And I mean, the points have been made too about the interlinkages, the growing cooperation between Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. That is, it's true. And so the one point I was going to start with also is I agree with all of the points about the very strong state of the transatlantic relationship. I think that is true. I think Russia's invasion revitalized, woke up the transatlantic allies whose views were going in different directions about where the threat is to refocus on the urgency and immediacy. It aligned our threat perceptions in a really helpful way. And so, yes, we all know the talking points that NATO is bigger, it's stronger with Sweden and Finland, they're spending more on defense. That is all true. But the urgency and the cooperation is not just taking place in the transatlantic relationship, it's also taking place among our adversaries. And so the invasion of Ukraine has been a critical catalyst of the growing cooperation between Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. And in that world, the United States needs Europe to do more because there's no way that we together will be able to take on the threats that we face.
I'd like you also to address what Margus said, which is that the US needs to now prove also that it remains a credible and reliable ally to the Europeans. I mean, we saw the effects of the 7 months delay to Ukrainian aid. We don't know how long it's going to take Ukraine to make up for that lost time, if it's going to be able to make it up at all completely. And in that, I guess I'd like you also to address the question of, is it really true that America has become turning back to isolationism, or is actually Trumpism something else?
Yeah, those are really good questions. I mean, I think if anything, the US response and the leadership role that it played in the aftermath of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, full-scale invasion of Ukraine, should demonstrate and reassure European allies that the United States is ready and willing to play a leadership role. I mean, I do see the United States leadership in terms of the warning, the declassification of intelligence and trying to ring the alarm bells that it was happening. I mean, I think we all know the narrative of the story, but the United States was really crucial, I think, in preparing European allies and partners for what was coming. That enabled Europeans and the United States together to start working on sanctions packages and other things. I mean, so I think to me, I think we have proven that we are a committed ally in this relationship, and that we recognize the existential nature of the threat that Russia poses to the transatlantic relationship. I think that's here to stay.
But that doesn't seem to be unanimous within the Congress. I mean, we're seeing domestic politics affecting that, and parts of the US Congress saying the opposite, which is that, you know, the issue right now isn't Russia, and why should the US continue sending so much money and aid to Ukraine? And that is what is now front of mind when you're in Europe. That's what they've been dealing with on the US side for the past year. So yes, in 2022, the US was crucial and vital, and without it, perhaps Ukraine would be in a much worse situation. But today, the US is in a way part of the problem of why Ukraine is struggling to fight back.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. And so I think your question about is there a growing strain of isolationism is part of the answer. And I think the fact that the supplemental eventually passed demonstrate that there is still strong bipartisan political support for continuing and sustaining military aid to Ukraine. I think we all are familiar with the unfortunate reality in the way that politics got caught up in all of this. But the votes were there in Congress, and there were just a lot of reasons why the vote didn't get to the floor. But once it got to the floor, it passed, and I think that is a very strong reflection of where the US Congress is and where the US public is. It is true, comma, however, I do think it is fair to say that there is a minority, particularly within the Republican Party, who has an increasingly isolationist bent. I don't think President Trump is the isolationist, so I agree. I think someone had made that point. I don't think Trump is an isolationist, but there are isolationists within the Republican Party who may be in a future Trump administration. So that will certainly be something that could shape U.S. policy going forward. And I think from a U.S. perspective, and for people who care quite a lot about the transatlantic relationship, there's a little bit of frustration in Washington and within the transatlantic supporters to say, well, I mean, this has been a possibility for a very long time. And so why is it just now, in the year of the election, that Europe is really accepting as a possible reality that Trump could return? These trends have been present for a very long time. And so why is it now that they're just getting serious about increasing defense spending, getting defense industry on track, all of these things, when in reality it probably should have been started a very long time ago?
So I put that question to you, Margus. Do you think that the Europeans were asleep at the wheel too long and they're waking up too late, and now the hill is extremely steep because the world has now moved on to, power dynamics that are very violent and kind of uncontrolled in a way?
Yes, the Europeans, we are different as well. We in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, we were awake all the time. We didn't sleep at all. And it was really hard to sleep during these 50 years of occupation. Really, it's not a joke. But I think that it's a good thing. Is it too late or not?
So you're saying the Western Europeans were asleep?
I'm not dividing, but I'm just talking as a mentality. The case, the case is the good thing that actually we woke up.
Okay.
The question is, it's like late or not too late or whatever. Instead of farmers' benefits, as we discussed mostly like 3 years ago, we are talking now about defense investments. And we are talking about the real military support to third countries. And I think that one sign here, how to say that mentally, was actually that Germany is giving the military support to third countries. And we remember the stories from the beginning of the aggression, that what kind of debates actually happened in Germany. And this is understandable. I think that big change has happened. But for me, I'm not saying that everything is good right now. Yeah. Too often I see, if I'm going to Brussels and so on, that there's still a mentality and hope that business as usual, it comes back. And the good life, what we had before, it will return. But it won't. It's so brutal. And somehow, the other way around, I was saying that it took too long for US, to make the decision about the 61 billion funds of Ukraine. But the other way around, it actually pushed Europe more to have a debate. What is going to happen? What is going to happen if something happens with US? What kind of responsibilities actually we have? And this is a good wake-up call. I mean, it's not even the Putin thing, because we know all that Putin is a very dangerous piece. But we have to be more independent. We have to take more responsibilities. But the bad thing is for US and European Union or Europe as well, that we haven't made this decision that we are going to win the war. That's the main problem. Because we are still waiting that actually we can maybe somehow wrap it up, maybe things are finishing well, and then the life will continue. And that's a bad thing. And the second thing, the other way around, is we have not decided, and there is a fear that what if Russia will lose the war? We are so much afraid about that what will happen then? And this is the wrong attitude. Russia can lose the war. And that's the way around. So this is for Europeans mainly the question, that not just to wake up to invest more, but actually what is the goal? We have not agreed that.
So you're saying that 2 years into this war, the entire transatlantic alliance hasn't been able to define a theory of victory or a definition of victory in Ukraine?
The definition of victory and definition of Russia, if Russia will lose the war. So this is the main problem, because I think that there are many debates somewhere, but what happens then when can Russia lose? But I say Russia can lose and must lose because then the new reality will come.
So what do allies discuss when they have all these summits if they're not talking about this?
we are discussing that.
I mean,
we
it's
are
a big war,
concerned.
right?
Sometimes I'm wondering that how deeply concerned we can be, because we are more concerned and more deeply concerned and so on. So, but now we need to act as well. And I agree with you as well. If we could decide, like 2 years ago, that we will win the war, so I think that we have spread thousands of Ukrainians. Instead, we could invest more. We could give everything, as Estonia did and many other countries, military support. And I think that this war maybe would have been finished already, and Russia could have lost already. And now, but we are like, I don't know, like waiting that something will happen. But this is a bad part of this mentality that it is not ending. It's not just like war movie. It's not war movie. We are waiting that 2.5 hours. We're watching, okay, 2 hours and 10 minutes. Let's wrap it up because we would like to order the next movie from Netflix. Maybe it's comedy, but it's not a movie. So we have lost time. Yeah. We have lost lots of Ukrainian people's life. And actually we have, in some cases, more divided than ever before because Russian aggression against Ukraine is not the only conflict. Our votings in United Nations are already very much divided, so about the Gaza. And this is what is concerning me. We have not understood there is a fight for lifestyle. The world will be more divided than ever before between democracies and non-democracies. And democracies are in minority. So this is the understanding, and that's about this transatlantic bond as well. We are so much connected to US and the other way around. Europe is creating lots of jobs in US as well. I went to US last year to visit, not to DC only, but I went to state of Arkansas. And the reason was that actually Estonia is buying with more than 300 million euros worth HIMARS systems there. Yeah. And I met the local lawmakers and businessmen. And this is pretty red state, if you know. And then I explained that actually I came here to invest, and we are creating jobs here. And because of Russian aggression against Ukraine, because Russia is a threat, and many European countries are doing the same, and they understood this language much more, then we need to be practical as well. But yes, we must agree that what is the goal. When we agree that, then we have an action plan, and then we need to act as well. And this is the cheapest way and most efficient, because what Ukrainians are not asking from us, even President Macron said that boots on the ground and so on, but Ukrainians are not asking our troops in. They're just asking what we have, weapons, and we have all the money in the world. And we are still considering going to be more concerned, but let's do it. That's the case.
Anna, Isabel, I mean, sitting at the westernmost part of Europe and the part of the transatlantic relationship there, I just wonder what is your perspective on defining victory in Ukraine, and also having to engage in retail politics at a state level in the US in order to keep the American population, on side and engaged and supportive of this war effort?
Well, first of all, in our perspective, the definition of victory must rely on Ukraine and on Ukrainians. So it's not supposed to Portugal or the European Union or NATO to define what victory is for Ukraine. What we must do is to support, fully commit and fully support and fully encourage that Ukraine prevails as a nation and as a symbol of the fight of all the liberal democracies at this moment. That is our clear perspective on the issue. On our relation with the United States and the role that the United States should play, I always like to remember an old provocation from a United States scholar, Robert Kagan, then I think back in 2001, said that, and he wrote that Americans are from Mars and Europeans from Venus. And that's why there is a clear burden sharing. It's inevitable that there is this burden sharing. Americans should clean up the mess or define what's the definition, for instance, to define what victory should be, and Europeans should be more focused on humanitarian, on development. So a clear distinction between hard politics and soft politics. Well, I don't think that we are on that stage. I think that we moved in a very positive way, I believe, to a strong cooperation where, of course, burden sharing is still important, but in a perspective of cooperation, complementarity, and especially defining what is the expertise of each nation, of each region, also to support Ukraine. And for Portugal, that's very important because Portugal is usually perceived as a small state. And we are not small. I mean, probably in terms of geography, that can be the perception, but we are not small when we talk about our commitment in the world. For instance, in missions and operations, we have now 12 in NATO, 2 in the United Nations, 10 in the European Union. We are now leading, we lead from the beginning the European Union training mission in Mozambique, where Estonia actually also participates. And we have 4 missions and operations in bilateral. That means, in terms of resources allocated overseas, more than 92 million euro. We are in 6 countries in terms of defense cooperation, 3 countries in training mission. We are, in general, in the 4 continents, Europe, Africa, Asia, America. So just to tell you that when we try to distinguish, or when we try to divide the world into Mars or Venus or into low politics and hard politics, we have to bear in mind that each nation has its specific role to play. And I think that Ukraine was the best example that we can actually cooperate. What is for us probably the best challenge now is to deal with the fatigue. The fatigue with the public opinions in a year where we have major elections. We have elections for the European Parliament in a few days, in a few weeks, and then we have the major elections in the United States in November. So how are we going to deal with the public opinion in the West that is very much used to the definition of freedom, liberal democracy, development, and also the fatigue of the Ukrainian people? So for me, that is the major concern.
Andrea, you wanted to respond here or to react?
Yeah, just a reaction, which is, I mean, I think maybe it touches on this fatigue point. I mean, a large part of the problem is precisely what you said, is that we don't share what the end goal is in Ukraine, and the United States and European allies and partners continue to turn, we continue to defer to Ukraine in terms of what is the definition of victory. And that is right and it's understood, but are we having a conversation with the Ukrainians about what victory looks like? I mean, part of the problem in the earliest days when the United States was trying to pass the supplemental, Congress wanted to know from the administration to what end. What is the goal? And I think part of the fatigue stems from our inability to communicate to our publics what it is we're trying to accomplish. Yeah. It also is creating a problem where then we're not able to align our means to match the appropriate ends. So and again, I'm the one sitting on the outside, so I get to say this, and I don't know what's happening necessarily fully on the inside. But I do really think it's time for the United States and European allies and partners to sit down and have a discussion with Ukraine on precisely what it is they want to accomplish.
But Andrea,
if it's full territorial sovereignty, then we need to have a discussion as an alliance. Can we do what it takes to get that done? And if the answer is no, then we need to have that conversation, and we need to hear from Ukraine what it is they need from us in order to get to a point that they can live with. I don't sense that conversation is happening, and I do think it would help us to then align all of our means to achieve now an agreed upon end.
But my question to you is that conversation not happening, or has it been happening, but allies can't agree, even with Ukraine?
I don't know. I can defer to
that's one of the issues that we also have to keep on the table.
Yeah.
Maybe Ukrainian, I think it's the politically correct thing and acceptable thing for, European and American politicians to say we defer to Ukraine. But are we at a point where Ukraine has one idea in mind and parts of the alliance have another idea and another part have a third idea? And it brings me actually to Benjamin and back to Margus as well on this. Ahead of the summit in DC, it seems very clear that NATO is not going to invite Ukraine to join the alliance. The Vilnius summit left a bitter taste in the mouths of some people in the alliance, not everyone. Do you think enough work is being done ahead in the build-up in order to avoid the feeling of a disappointing or failure, a failing summit on this particular issue, of course?
Yeah. Let me just react to a couple of things I heard, and then I'll definitely respond to this. First, when we want to share the blame about Europeans not waking up early enough to the threat and relying too much on the United States, I fully agree that, for example, for a long time, France and Germany did not listen enough to countries like Estonia, like Poland, like the different Baltic states about the threat that was represented by Vladimir Putin's regime. That's something that was articulated very clearly last year by President Macron in Bratislava in his speech. But if we want to push the honesty, I would also say that there's lots of countries in Europe that for decades have been very reluctant at the very talk of European defense and Europeans doing more, because just even mentioning European defense would send a message to the United States that it could undercut NATO, that we meant that we didn't want the United States anchored to the European continent. I think that's changing as well. I say this in Estonia because hearing Prime Minister Kajas pushing for the idea of defense Eurobonds, and who's a staunch transatlanticist, but also says, we need to do more to find resources, build resources at the European level to be able to cooperate more and upgrade our military capabilities and help Ukraine. And the two will reinforce each other, are not contradictory. I think that shows how the full continent has shifted on its understanding both of the threats, but also of the ways that we Europeans and the United States can do together, but also on their own, supporting each other to do so. And when it comes to Ukraine, this will be one of the hardest strategic questions at the end of the year if we have a President Trump that's elected and if he decides. By the way, I have no idea what he will do on Ukraine. This is the president who gave javelins to Ukraine when the Obama administration refused to do so. So we don't know. But the uncertainty is already problematic. The uncertainty is already sending a message to Putin that he thinks time is playing in his favor, that he can wait us out because Europeans are weak and divided and they won't hold the line, and that maybe tomorrow there's going to be an election playing in his favor. So one of the critical things for us is to clearly convey to Putin that time is not playing in his favor, that even if tomorrow the US were to withdraw its support from Ukraine, that we're not going to push Ukraine to a terrible negotiation that would be a capitulation with disastrous consequences on our security and the precedent that it creates for the rest of the world, but that we're going to upgrade our capabilities, our support, to be able to continue to support Ukraine even without the United States if necessary.
But is that work being done to enable the Europeans to do that? Because there's a lot of talk about that. But when you look at the state of the industry, when you look at the state of consolidation and fragmentation, it's like a lot of talk for 2 years. But
no, you're right. Well, look, I think a lot's been done when it comes to ammunition and everything and where we will be in 2025. But this is why I've been talking about Eurobonds. This is why I'm a supporter also of confiscating Russian frozen assets, the central bank assets, and not just the windfall profits, because I think we need to think creatively about how we're going to find and build the resources to be able to sustain in the long run our support for Ukraine, with or without the United States. I certainly hope with the United States, but because it's our security that's at stake. And I would say our security, to a large extent, even more than the one of the United States on the European continent.
I'm just going to have Margus respond, and then we'll talk about the summit.
NATO summit. Okay.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. But Margus, go ahead.
We are very practical people in Estonia because we must be, because of weather, but also the geographical location. But without getting I've been always amazed that we, like the Western world, we always somehow thinking that what is actually the plan of Putin? What is the ban? What is behind his word? So, but the plan is already years public. It's public. You can find it on different web pages. But it is real reality. That is, his plan is to restore the Soviet Union empire, and he has said it very, 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 very loudly, already years ago.
Russia's borders end
Yes.
nowhere.
Yes. So now it's already nowhere, but anyways. And he's committing this plan, whatever it takes. And now we need to understand that this is real plan. This is not just the words. And now he's, we lost, Georgia 2008, then, Ukraine started 2014 already. I just came back from Georgia, right directly. We're going to lose. If we are not acting, we are going to lose Georgia, then we are going to lose Armenia, and then we are going to lose all the region. So we need to understand that we need to act. That is a real plan, and the other side, Putin is committing this plan. So we must decide that we have to fight against this plan, not having theoretical things. So about the practical steps, these Eurobonds, 100 billion, it's doable. It's something like a marriage, finally, actually. We are raising money, and we are sharing the burden, because we are putting on the border of Russia more in than some other countries, but also that's a proof as well. For US as a transatlantic partner, we invest more. 100 billion euros bonds to defense industry, it's a big money, and we can do. Second is actually about the Russian frozen assets. Estonia initiated a year ago the law draft, and actually 2 days ago it was adopted from Estonian parliament, that how can we use the Russian frozen assets during the war, public and private. And I got today this threat from the Chechen gang leader that he will send the missiles to Estonia. But actually, it is the right thing to do. 4 months ago, nobody wanted to talk about it in Europe. But US decided actually to be that part of this 61 billion is the Russian frozen assets. And Europe decided as well that profits of the assets, they will go to Ukraine, at least. But let's use this money as well. And then we're talking about ammunition. Do you know that actually this is it's a huge secret? But Estonia this year is one of the biggest buyer of ammunition in Europe, with 1.3 million people. And that's why we are asking that, why the industry is not producing, why we're not doing that. So this is something that knowledge that we need to invest really for the real war, in the meaning of the classical war, the artillery war, in Europe. It's not there yet. Maybe it comes right now. And of course, we offered everybody, and I think many countries already following, we all signing, and some of them have signed already bilateral agreements with Ukraine. Let's do 0.25% of GDP military support per year. It's altogether 120 billion euros per year, and it's enough. It's enough long-term commitment for Ukraine to deal with that. So, but actually this 61 billion is approximately the 0.25% of GDP of US. But 0.25 is doable, because GDP figure is honest for all the different societies. It's like the burden we have to carry. We have given 1.5% of GDP right now already, and we do more, and we are still here. Okay, we increase taxes, but and cutting 5% next year. But anyways, because we know that this is existential question, not for us only, but for everybody. So these decisions must be made, not theoretically, but in practice. And these decisions are helping Ukraine, and Ukraine is fighting instead of us, not only for us.
So can I put to you the question about the NATO summit in DC, and how do we avoid another big disappointment?
Actually, I was satisfied with the results from Vilnius summit, because I really felt what was reality, and we really pushed the limits. Just even I think that during the last couple of days, to get out the Council of Ukraine, and to get out the path and these decisions. And of course, expectations were higher about the invitation, and we could be happy as well if we could do it. But problem with this summit in DC is that this is just before elections. And, the focus is not there, I think. It's my feeling. And now we're talking about invitation or not, but actually the situation is worse, and expectations are worse before the last summit in Vilnius. Then I think that all we were sure that Ukraine will win the war. But now we have to heavily support Ukraine right now, not waiting the summit, and not talking about invitation, but more wordings. And maybe let's add some words, because it's obvious that US and some other countries are not ready to send and give an invitation. We have to work with that, of course. Estonia is supporting fully this invitation. But we have to support Ukraine, that we are not at the summit at the same time when Russia is breaking through. Can you imagine this kind of meeting there? That actually at the battlefield, bad things are happening in reality. So this is totally different situation. We are not talking then about invitation, but we are talking then already about Russia winning the war. And that's the mentality. That's a fear, actually. People, politicians are scared about this. And I do hope that we act. We have this 61 billion. We have many initiatives in Europe as well, air defense. We have patriots all over the world, and we are not able to give them. I don't know why, but Estonia has no. We should have given, but these are the things we have to think about, not about the wordings of the declaration of NATO only. But it's clear that Ukraine must belong to NATO, because gray zones are over. Gray zones in the neighboring countries of Russia are green lights for Putin. And this is obvious. If we are not learning from the past, I don't know why.
What's history for if we don't learn from it?
Yeah, maybe the pain is not here in our societies in reality, but maybe the smart people are learning from the other mistakes. But okay.
Anna, Isabel, on the summit, do you share the position that perhaps what is more important than you negotiating a comma and a word here and there? It is actually for things to be happening concretely.
Well, I think that we are a little bit more optimistic because Portugal is especially focused in the agenda for the South. And on that regard, our expectation is big. There was a working group that was reflecting upon the threats from South in the last few months. The group was actually led by a Portuguese scholar. And in Washington summit, for now, I think that we have the guarantee that a clear statement on the South and on how the threats really have a 360 approach will be acknowledged. Of course, that we know it is a summit that will happen in the United States a few months before the elections, but for us, those are internal issues of the United States that should not contaminate the feeling of the Washington summit when NATO is celebrating its 75th anniversary, when Finland and Sweden recently joined. So that is the most important for us. And I think that no matter the challenges that NATO is facing, and of course, major challenges, I think NATO in its 75th anniversary is really alive and kicking and ready to mobilize the allies for this comprehensive view. I think that we must be optimistic. Of course, we must be realistic, but I think that we must be more optimistic than pessimist.
Benjamin, on the summit.
First, I agree with everything the minister said, and of course, the urgency is to help Ukraine on the ground. I wish we would go for invitation after the war, but invitation, because you were talking about the definition of victory. And the definition of victory, I think we can all agree on it, is not only territorial. No one believes that Putin is fighting only to gain control of towns. What he's trying to do is, of course, challenge and destroy the European security architecture, but in Ukraine is wipe out Ukrainian sovereignty, is wipe out the possibility for Ukrainians to choose freely and democratically their future and their orientation. And so it's obvious that integration in Euro-Atlantic institutions, the EU and NATO, even though the EU, to be blunt, will take time, it takes reforms to rule of law, corruption, the markets, but that this process, this integration, is part of what we should consider a definition of victory. And in 2008, some considered that inviting Ukraine, well, not even inviting, but actually just the first step to Ukraine and Georgia would be seen as a provocation to Russia. And what's the lesson that we've drawn from this is that's the other way around. Closing the door to Ukraine and Georgia was seen as an invitation for aggression by Russia. A few months later, Russia attacked Georgia, and then we had Crimea and Donbass already in 2014, and then this. So not only is it the only way to ensure long-term peace, stability, and deterrence of further Russian aggression, but let's be honest, that is what Ukrainians are dying for today. I was on Maidan 10 years ago, and it's the first time, basically, since what's happening in Georgia now, the first time that we've seen young people getting shot at and killed for the European flag, and that gives us a responsibility.
Andrea, I started this by saying it's not just about Ukraine and defense, and we've just spent an hour talking about it. It's normal because people are dying and it's important. But I would like to bring into the conversation the economic and financial side of things. And, you know, sitting in DC, do you feel that lawmakers in DC understood the impact of the Inflation Reduction Act on Europe and how it would be seen, and the possible impacts on the relationship with Europe, beyond obviously the very strong bond that exists because of NATO and a shared, you know, value base and history?
No, I don't. And I think, you know, when you look, there has been oftentimes a disconnect between Washington's desire to compete with China and implications for European allies and partners. So the IRA is obviously case number one, where it wasn't fully appreciated by all people who were making those decisions about repercussions and reactions from allies. Obviously, AUKUS is case number two. So there is oftentimes, despite the fact that we do have the most transatlantic president that we've had in a very long time, it runs against these cross currents of the desire to better and more effectively compete with China. Those tensions are there and are things that the transatlantic allies are going to have to work through. But I do think that the economic piece to all of this, trade and other things, are going to have to play a role in our Washington and Europe's ability to again, I'm going back to the geopolitical environment and the changes. Those are key pillars in our ability to address and deal with the changing geopolitics. And oftentimes these economic pieces, those foundational pillars are not firmly in place.
And is it fair to say, I know you're not part of the government, but is it fair to say that there is a bit of a contradiction in the demands that the US is making of its allies, which is to spend more and do more for themselves because it's the right thing to do for themselves, but the US doesn't seem to be willing to accept that that might also mean that they might spend more on their own industries and slightly less on American industry. Of course, not stopping completely, but that there will be that shift. It feels like that contradiction is something that in DC is not really sort of talked about or thought of in these terms.
I think it's understood, and I think, I mean, it's an age-old kind of challenge. And when Europeans, I mean, when you hear the United States saying, "Europe, we want you to do more, but don't do it that way,"
yeah.
And don't do this or don't do that. That has been a long-standing challenge. But my sense is that Washington is moving, and I think Blinken was in Paris just recently, where he talked, I think, and gave the most persuasive and direct statement about Washington's desire to see Europe do more. And I do think that is reflective of a broader change. It gets back to this idea that Washington fundamentally understands that with the rising China challenge, we do need Europe to do more. And there are long-standing and multiple bureaucratic barriers and all of the other baggage that comes to this issue. But my strong sense is that it is changing very much, and that moving forward, Washington, at least I hope, will be far more supportive in enabling and facilitating Europe to do more, because that is what is required.
I'm going to open it up to questions from the public. So if you do have one, please raise your hand. We have one over there in the back, please. And please introduce yourself. The mic isn't working.
Try one more?
Yes.
Now it's working. Thank you. I'm Valeriu Pasha. I'm from the Republic of Moldova, representing a think tank watchdog community. I have a specific question to Madam Secretary of State. In the previous panel, there was a very interesting point about either there are countries' fifth column inside NATO or not. And someone responded that, well, not actually. The governments are behaving this way because this is the willing of the people. And when I'm looking on the behavior of some countries and also on the results of the opinion polls about the Russian aggression, I don't see it's like, well, Baltic countries are nearby Russia. They experienced the Russian occupation. That's why they are more resilient. Slovak Republic, Hungary also experienced that. And what surprised me the most are responses from Portugal. How you do it? Like responses from Portugal are almost equal with Poland, with even some Baltic countries, much, much better than France, Italy, and Portugal is very far from Ukraine. How it happens? Like my perception is probably that this is not about geography, but about how serious the states take its commitments and the commitment to build a resilient society. Free and strong media, civil society, everything, and leadership. Just to end, why? Because I think if Mr. Orban would order to all his propagandistic media that from now we all support Ukraine, Hungary would be the leader of supporting Ukraine. Thank you.
Anna Isabel, you wanna take that and answer? What's the magic sauce to for people to understand the stakes?
Well, I can guarantee it's not propaganda. It's a natural thing. Well, Portugal, first of all, is a country that is known for hosting a lot of different communities for a long time ago and with very reasonable cases of success. And we have a strong community of Ukrainians for a long time ago. The community is bigger now since 2022, but we always had a lot of people from Ukraine in Portugal. So I think that first thing is something that it's quite natural. We think that Portugal likes to host and is a good hoster. And at the same time, the government, since day one, was very clear on the fully commitment towards Ukraine. And that commitment has been growing. I mean, I didn't want to be very specific in terms of our great contribution to Ukraine, but let me just share with you all that, for instance, we participate in the Air Force Capability Coalition. The F-16s are being trained. We train F-16s in Portugal. We have a lot of Ukrainian military that are in Portugal to be trained. We do participate in the Maritime Capability Coalition. Since the beginning of the war, we already displayed more than 125 million euro in the military assistance package. So I think it's a coalition of goodwill in terms of supporting Ukraine. Again, even if our geography is far, we completely acknowledge that as long as Ukraine prevails as a nation, our liberal democracy is assured.
Benjamin, you wanted to answer?
Can you just allow me to react to your question on the IRA and economic issues? Because we're in the midst of a European election and we'll have a new commission.
I didn't want to be a stereotype and go directly to France and talk about IRA, but here we go.
But look, I mean, in the last week, the US announced new tariffs on solar panels and electric vehicles coming out of China. And it's a legitimate thing to do. But then the question for us Europeans is if we don't do something similar, we'll be the ones taking the excessive amount of electric vehicles coming out of China in an industry that's heavily subsidized. And I think it's also an existential question for us as Europeans. Do we want to be just a sort of big market that thinks like an NGO that's universal and open to all? Or do we stop being naive, look at what others are doing? You have China. I don't want to replicate China, but you have China. You have the United States that are heavily investing in their industry, in their green transition, in their tech industry, that with the IRA and other things, that are protecting it.
You mean they're subsidizing it?
They're subsidizing it, they're protecting it, they're investing. And do we draw the conclusions from this? And we also say that we have our own trade interests, that we have our own industry that we need to be able to protect, that we clearly need to screen Chinese investments, either the ones that are coming from subsidized industries or the ones that are coming for our strategic infrastructure and industry. And we need to start thinking this way as well. And if you look, since 2008, Europe has lost about 20 to 25 points of GDP per capita compared to the United States. And 2008 is a turning point. It's the moment you have the financial crisis that started in the US because of US financial practices. But the US reacted massively by injecting cash, by spending with higher deficits and debt that we have. The United States, if you look at the deficit and debt ratio, would not be able to join the European Union according to its own rules.
I don't think they're applying, by the way.
And they're not applying. But it took us years to react, to protect the Eurozone, to be able to invest. And we have the same debates now when the US is doing the IRA. Yes, it has an impact on our own industry. But instead of just complaining the US is doing, let's look at what they're doing and also invest, maybe subsidize, maybe protect, maybe have European industrial champions to emerge and be competitive on the world stage.
I have a follow-up, and then I'll come back to the audience, so think about your question. You walked into this, so here's my question to you. In Emmanuel Macron's speech, Sorbonne 2, the last one that he gave on Europe, I was really struck by the parallel he drew between Chinese and American unfair trade practices. And I just wonder, formulating things this way, basically saying that both now represent a threat to Europe's economic well-being and survival, economically, of course, what kind of effect does that have on the relationship, on the transatlantic relationship?
Well, first, we would never put them on the same level. I mean, the president has always said, China is a systemic rival, like the EU says, and the US is an ally. So the US is the one that called the EU a foe under Donald Trump and put trade barriers that are not all lifted under the Biden administration. It took a very long time to lift some of them. So, the trend towards protectionism or trade barriers or all this thing wasn't started. But I don't want to even talk about it in a political, competitive way. I'm just saying that Europeans should not be naive about the fact that this era of happy globalization and free trade is behind us, and trade is still very central and important, but we should also give ourselves the means to be competitive, to protect our industry. There is a more political element with China when it invests in strategic infrastructure like harbors or cyber, where we really need to protect ourselves. That's, I think the main point.
Great, thank you. Right here at the, great. I'll take a couple and then get back. Yeah.
My name is Maxim Kononenko, ambassador of Ukraine here in Tallinn. And I have a question about definition of victory. Mm-hmm. And I will begin my question by thanking and by saying that we are really grateful to all our partners and nations supporting Ukraine, because without your support and without your assistance, Ukraine wouldn't exist maybe already at this stage. At the same time, during previous panel and now during this panel, you have been referring to the definition on victory, and you have been deferring this definition to Ukraine, and all the time that it is up to Ukraine to define the victory. And I will be a little bit provocative in this situation, and I will say that it is hypocritical approach, because Ukraine has already defined a victory. For us, everything is obvious. It is our borders of 1999, full withdrawal of Russian troops, Russian pays all destructions, criminals brought to the account, and so on. So you can take peace formula of President Zelensky, and you will see main threads of this Ukrainian approach. So, and to be honest, Russia has already defined also its formula, victory formula, because for Russia it is the same formula, 1999. But it means that Ukraine is incorporated in Russian state. NATO withdrew from Eastern and Central Europe. It is the same date, 1999. My question is 1999.
Yeah.
My question actually is the transatlantic community is ready to give us necessary resources to achieve Ukrainian vision of victory in this situation, or transatlantic community should admit that, and to be frank in this, to say to Ukrainians that it's impossible to achieve your vision of victory. and say it frankly and say that we cannot provide you with these resources. But at the same time, you should to admit that you cannot defend rules-based international order. So my question to all of you will be transatlantic couple, transatlantic community able to overcome this dilemma and to propose its own vision of victory in this situation?
Thank you.
Because it's necessary today. Thank you.
Just behind him, the man over there.
Hi, I'm Dr. Sam Ramani from RUSI in London, the Security and Defense think tank. And thank you so much for your interesting presentations and for this discussion. I had a question that I wanted to ask that would kind of tie the developments that we're seeing in the Indo-Pacific region to those that we're seeing inside Ukraine. Because obviously there's a similar division between Europe and the United States on how to deal with China as there was on how to deal with Russia before it emerged as a major threat. We're seeing some progress on the technology side, but very different responses on issues like Taiwan or Hong Kong's Article 23. So do you think that the Europeans and the Americans have learned lessons in terms of transatlantic cooperation that could be applied to the Indo-Pacific theater as China becomes more revanchist? Because right now, I see that we've got these NATO-wide pronouncements about technology decoupling, there's trilateral pacts that are forming, there's things that are in motion, and the Chinese are repeating Russian rhetoric about like NATO expansion and other things. But I don't see that much of a definitive set of lessons learned or a definitive movement towards transatlantic cooperation that would allow us to be prepared in the event of Chinese aggression in the Pacific. I feel like the mistakes are repeating themselves.
Thank you. And I'll take just one behind over there, and then we're back to the panel.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Alexander Daniluk. I'm head of Ukrainian Center for Defense Reforms. Thank you for very interesting conversation. And just regarding that, I think very pragmatic and reasonable approach toward building, or bringing back, industry to Europe. So I think that it just like one of ideas to discuss for you. I think that this is actually Ukrainian role after the war. Actually, it's not only the frontier. It's not only the future frontier of the European Union and NATO. To protect against Russia and maybe some other troublemakers. But it's also like new China for Europe. Like actually, I mean it's very difficult to find that competitive models because of labor, because of standards, and I think that Ukraine could be a solution, Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. I'm just going to go down, and you can answer whichever question you want. And if you need help remembering, I will remind you. Margus, go ahead.
I'm coming back to this definition of victory of Ukraine. So I think that the question is much more wider. Definition of victory of Ukraine is, of course, about Ukraine, and we have the plan. Actually, President Zelensky has offered the plan about 10 points, and all these points are there. This is already the ambassador explained as well, a couple of them. But it is a plan. So, and this is the only plan. I'm concerned a bit about this peace conference in Switzerland. It's one thing, it's a great thing that it is happening, and hopefully many countries will participate. But the case is that what is the outcome? If there will be like, I don't know how many different plans. So what is the plan finally? And I think that here is the right approach that, yes, Ukrainians are deciding that. And you Ambassador, had a rightful question whether we can support and we are able to support Ukraine to win. And we have actually the solution for that, 0.25% of GDP. It's there. It's calculated, and it's enough. We need only the decision. But the main question is not even about the definition of victory or the understanding and getting rid of the fear that if Russia can lose. Yes, Russia can lose. But the main question is how the security architecture looks like after the war, after the winning of the war. And this is the main question, and this is a question for us, for NATO, for European Union, all the other organizations. And we have not, made a deal or decided how does it look like. And we see that the neutrality is not working anymore. The gray zones must be gone. And then from there is coming the clear answer that whether Ukraine must be in or out NATO. It's not only, sorry to say, it's not only to support Ukraine, it's about us as well, because we don't want to have the aggression or the military conflict in our region anymore. It means that we have to invest heavily. We have to get rid of these gray zones. Ukraine is in NATO, because NATO is the only security guarantee which is working. All the other bilateral things, they are not working. And that's the case. And the other way around, I'm the Foreign Minister of Estonia, and I would like to be sure that if we are going to have anything in our territory, or in our region, also Valky Cap, I would like to have Ukraine troops, who actually the only country then in NATO have been fighting victoriously against Russia, using our weapons, NATO weapons and standards. And then I think that this is the huge military power with a huge will to fight. And this is what I would like to see as well. So main question is that we have to find an answer and agree all together, how does it look like? How does looks like the architecture of security in Europe? And we have this plan agreed.
Anna Isabel?
Yeah, thank you. I will also insist on the definition of victory. It's not hypocritical, but it has to do with a very specific thing, ownership. And the European Union, NATO, the international community as a whole, cannot just preach what doesn't practice. In other words, it must preach and practice ownership, societal resilience. All of that has to do with the need of Ukraine, as other nations, to define what is their future. What the international community can do, again, is to fully support the roadmap to get there. And for me, one thing is for sure. Even if Ukraine is not part of NATO, since 24th February 2022, I think it's obvious for all the allies that an attack on Ukraine is an attack on the Euro-Atlantic community. And it's no longer just about physical society, it became an ontological question.
Benjamin?
On the definition of victory, of course, we're talking about the cost of what it would mean to sustain this effort, and it's a long-term effort, and we're talking about war fatigue. The problem is let's talk about the cost of not doing it, the cost of Russian victory. And I'm a recovered think tanker who's now in politics, and so a big effort of what I try. I'm the chairman of the France-Ukraine Friendship Group at the National Assembly, and a big effort what I try to do is not only go in the media, but also travel the country, talk to really all different kinds of society to make the case for supporting Ukraine in the long run. And one of the things that I try to say is this is not about altruism, and it's not only about abstract principles of democracy in Europe and freedom. If Russia were to take control of Ukraine, then it would have a very direct impact on the economic well-being and the purchasing power of French citizens. It would control food prices through exports of cereals. It would control even more energy prices. And so, the cost of inaction, the cost of abandoning Ukraine before its victory would be absolutely disastrous economically and strategically. And I think that's really a case that we always need to make. Just a word on transatlantic relationships and China. Of course, especially when it comes to technology, when it comes to trade, with screening investments, there's a lot we could do with the U.S. First, there's a lot we could draw inspiration from what the U.S. is doing and cooperate. On the military side, I think this is where we need to have a serious conversation that we haven't really been able to have with the U.S. so far, is when it comes to burden sharing. Are we more effective if we all focus on the Pacific and try to deter Chinese aggression in the South China Sea or Strait of Taiwan? Or is it more useful for both sides to have the Europeans be able to take ownership of their security in their own neighborhood, where the United States doesn't necessarily want to get dragged back in the future? Let's take a not so hypothetical example. In the 90s, we had a war and genocide in the Western Balkans, and we were helpless, the Europeans, to be able to put an end to it without US intervention. I am not sure you'd have a lot of appetite from the US polity tomorrow, left or right, to intervene if you had another crisis like this in the Western Balkans. So, and especially as it's focusing on its rivalry with China and deterring Chinese aggression. So this is where thinking about where we're most effective and maybe not doing the same thing but completing each other could be, I think, more useful.
Andrea?
I think a lot of really excellent points have already been made. The one point I would add on the China piece is one big concern for me and for the United States has been China's continued support to Russia throughout this war, and the list of dual-use goods that China continues to provide to Russia is only growing. The United States has far less leverage than Europe does. And I think this is one area where I know that the Washington is asking Europe to deliver the message, and I think Europeans could probably make that message more forcefully. So that's one area where I think there's still more to do on that front. I feel like with the last word, I need to say something inspiring or something. But I mean, just to get at the NATO, the kind of piece, one thing that has been bothering me is this idea that, and that we hear this regularly from senior US officials and from European policymakers alike, that Russia's invasion of Ukraine has been a strategic failure for Russia. It's always said in the past tense, but the mission is not yet accomplished. And I think that's, there is often a lot of like self-congratulation. So admitting Ukraine into NATO, because part of victory is making sure this never happens again. And that is the only way that we can guarantee that this won't happen again. So I think there's still a whole lot more that we need to do. I recognize the practicality that I think it's highly unlikely that it will happen under this administration, but we need to be thinking and planning and working out what an approach is for it to happen in the near future. So
we have time for 2 short questions and
I
very
tried to
quick
be inspirational.
answers. I know,
at the end,
I'm just
now
going to let you do
again.
it. We need more hope. So we're just going to have to, one here and one there, but please, short questions, and then short answers.
Thank you. Benjamin Tallis, Chairman Council on Foreign Relations. On geoeconomics, I think the main problem about the IRA is that Europeans were caught on the hop. The Americans have woken up to the end of the Washington Consensus, and we haven't. So what are we going to do to get real about the geoeconomic threats we face and do more together to actually friendshore, to open up alternative markets, to stop leaving de-risking to our companies who then say things like the head of Mercedes-Benz said, which to us de-risking means more investment in China. I mean, that's not my definition of de-risking, I have to say. So what are we going to do to actually start friendshoring, to pay that national security premium we need to in order to strategically align the sources of our prosperity with the sources of our security?
Thank you. And right next to you, I think there was, right there.
Hi, my name is Walter Sim. I'm the Tokyo-based Japan correspondent of Singapore newspaper, The Straits Times. I wanted to follow up on the conversation that you had earlier on the Indo-Pacific. We see countries like France, the UK, Germany doing so much in the Asia-Pacific region by deploying ships, for instance, for monitoring against, say, North Korea as a show of force against China. But are there expectations for Asia-Pacific, Indo-Pacific countries to likewise do more in Europe? We do see the NATO inviting the AP4 for a start. Are there expectations for countries like, say, Japan, South Korea, Australia to do more in Europe? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to start with you, Andrea, and then go down this way.
Well, I'm not going to touch the IRA question because that's a question for Europeans. But I think on the... is there an expectation for the partners to do more? I mean, in a way, the answer is a little bit yes. Number one, it's the NATO summit, and obviously the Indo-Pacific partners will be present in that at the 75th anniversary, and that's a really important source and display of unity across America's alliances. I also think it's a really important opportunity to do the sharing of best practices. So I think there's a lot that both Europe and the Asia-Pacific allies can mutually learn from one another in terms of having to stand up to the destabilizing tactics of revisionist authoritarian actors. So the more information sharing, the better. So that's another way that I think Indo-Pacific allies can be involved in engaging. And of course, it has been such an important contribution, the military support that's come from the Indo-Pacific. And the more that can last and be maintained, I think that's critically important. I mean, I think the one thing I find so highly ironic sometimes about the debate in the United States is that you have a contingent of people who are arguing that the United States needs to do more in the Indo-Pacific. And then you have our Indo-Pacific allies like the Japanese and the South Koreans saying, no, we really care what happens in Ukraine. Yeah. And so I think the more that the Indo-Pacific partners can make the case to Washington to push to push that agenda, to demonstrate how the crises are interlinked, that's only helpful.
Benjamin?
Well, I mean, first, I was going to make that exact same point, the one you made. I mean, when you look at the level of commitment of Japan and South Korea to Ukraine, it's actually getting a little bit, maybe in Europe, a little bit under the radar when it comes to the media commentary, but it's actually extremely critical, and it's remarkable. So that's, so these countries are already doing a lot and committed to European security. And of course, I mean, when we're talking about de-risking, when we're talking about investment, there's so much we could do with countries like South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, and others to increase our trade ties. To Benjamin's question, I mean, I think we need an hour and a half, and it's a huge issue. I mean, but at the very least, starting with the end of the naivete and the awakening to what's going on, and that it wasn't just an accident under the Trump years, and it's not, but there is something deeper going on, as you said, with the end of the Washington Consensus. That doesn't mean that there's not going to be trade and deep relationships with other countries, such as the United States, but at least putting the resources in terms of public and private investment. So also making sure that we have the level of education, competitiveness when it comes to tax, that we have a level of integration of markets, to also have our companies that are able to rise at the European level and not feel stuck just within one national market, because we see this everywhere, from Estonia to France. I mean, when you have a country that wants to grow above a certain level, it becomes very complicated to really be competitive at the European level, that we're able to defend and protect some industries, and that we make the hard choices. We were talking about the defense industry here. Yes, if we do want to be able to have an autonomous and competitive defense industry, then we need to support it with European funding, and we need the European funding to go to buying European. And I say this also as a politician. If we want to make the increase in defense spending sustainable in the long run, we have to make it acceptable to public opinions, because we might have to do it at the expense of other kind of social spending. So you need to be able to make the case that it's trickling down in terms of jobs, in terms of factories opening, in terms of reindustrialization, and not just going to purchase stuff elsewhere.
Thank you. Anna Isabel?
Yes, very quickly. I would say very short two final comments. The first one is that partnering is crucial if we want to have strong transatlantic community, and Indo-Pacific represents at this moment a very important partner. I think that when Obama back in 2013-14 said that it was important to shift to the Indo-Pacific region, there was already a vision how important the region was and is if we want to have a strong NATO and a strong transatlantic community. And my second point, of course, that the transatlantic community is a community of values, of principles, but we do need to be geopolitical as well. So we cannot be naive. That's why the interests must be at stake as well, Benjamin, like we said in the beginning of the afternoon, and I think that we can balance. But of course, we will always be, most of all, a community of principles and values.
Thank you. Margus?
I'm going to make it like 2 points. I had two very great visits to this region in the Pacific, to India and also to Japan lately. And my feeling is that this region is understanding very well that what does it mean if Russia will win the war? So that's the main case. We are all very grateful about the support what all different countries have given, and of course also Japan is not giving the military support, but supporting a lot Ukraine. But the case is that China is waiting what will happen with this war. China has all the time in the world to wait, and all the other countries which are not democratic, they're waiting actually what will happen. This is our responsibility as well. If Russia will win, then it is like the clear message that these rules are not working, they are not granted and guaranteed in a meaning. That with power you can change actually territories and the borders and many other things. And I think that this is so important there as well. This is like the common understanding. And that's the reason as well that the NATO summit in Washington will definitely have these partners from Indo-Pacific countries around the table to discuss the common understanding of that. And again, we're coming back to the Russian aggressions to Ukraine. And it's not only the Ukraine and our problem, but this is the common understanding. And the second, where I see as well the great potential is that everybody would like to get rid of this dependence from China. I mean, economical dependence, it is also political then. And there, as I see as well, that, I was there, Raisina dialogue, and it was, I think that everybody was there, because India has a great potential about resources and as well the scale to replace, and many other countries as well, the monopoly in the meaning of China, what China has. And this is something which puts us together to invest, to cooperate, to have common projects. And I think that the US and India, they're having the best relations ever during the last, I don't know, decades. And the US is also giving already technology, not only using the resources of and cooperation. So there are very practical relations, and as well somehow the Russian aggression against Ukraine, has initiated it. Yep. But of course, China position with Taiwan, but North Korea and so on. So 2 points, and there is opportunities, but also the Russian aggression and Russia can and must lose, and then the rules will be in place. Thank you.
Thank you. So if I were to sum it up, the transatlantic relations are okay, even though there are a few kinks to work out. There's perhaps 2 big, difficult conversations, maybe even come to Jesus moments about Ukraine and the definition of victory, but also on geoeconomics that need to be had, and in a third way on China. But these conversations are being had, so something hopeful to look forward to, and to see what happens in DC in July at the summit. I really want to thank our panelists for this great conversation, and thank you for staying till now. A big round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.